Elvis Presley once tipped a gas station attendant with a brand new Lincoln Continental because the attendant admired it. He received over 10,000 letters a week at the height of his fame, often trying to read as many as possible. One fan, after fainting upon meeting him, woke up to find Elvis himself kneeling beside her, asking if she was okay. Number 15. The girl who got stranded and met the king. It was a cold, rainy night in Memphis sometime in the early 1970s. Carol had driven all the way from Chicago with her friends, fueled by youthful energy and a desperate hope to see Elvis, their pilgrimage destination, Graceland. They joined the small crowd of devoted fans standing vigil outside the famous gates, hoping for a glimpse, a wave, anything hours past. The rain fell harder. Their car, unfortunately, chose this exact moment to give up. It wouldn't start. Stranded, soaked, and miles from home, despair started to set in. Suddenly, the Graceland gates swung open. A car emerged. Not the usual limousine, but something more ordinary. It slowed down as it approached the small group huddled near the disabled vehicle. The window rolled down. Inside, unmistakable even in the dim light, was Elvis Presley. He leaned over, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Y'all having trouble?" he asked, his voice soft and familiar. Carol and her friends were stunned into silence, mouths agape. Seeing their state, wet, shivering, and starstruck, Elvis didn't just offer sympathy. He told one of his guys, accompanying him, to call a mechanic immediately and have the bill sent directly to him. He then invited Carol and her friends inside the guardhouse at the gate to get warm and dry while they waited. He chatted with them for a few minutes, asking where they were from, making them feel like people, not just screaming fans. He apologized. He couldn't stay longer, as he had somewhere to be, but assured them they'd be taken care of. The mechanic arrived, fixed the car, and confirmed Elvis had covered everything. For Carol, the breakdown turned into the most unbelievable stroke of luck, a story she'd tell for the rest of her life, the night the king of rock and roll personally rescued her and her friends from a roadside disaster. It wasn't a concert. It wasn't a planned meet and greet. It was a moment of unexpected, spontaneous kindness from a superstar who didn't have to stop. Number 14. The elevator ride that changed everything. Picture Las Vegas in the 1970s. The International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton, was Elvis's kingdom during his residency. Fans flocked there, hoping for any kind of encounter. Mark, a young man on vacation with his family, was staying at the hotel. He wasn't a die-hard fan necessarily, but he certainly knew who Elvis was. Everyone did. One afternoon, Mark was waiting for the elevator on his floor. The doors dinged open, and standing inside, surrounded by a couple of imposing bodyguards, was Elvis Presley himself. He was dressed casually, but radiated that undeniable star power. Mark froze. Time seemed to slow down. One of the bodyguards made a move to block the entrance, but Elvis waved him off with a small smile. "Come on in," he said casually. Mark hesitantly stepped inside, his heart pounding like a drum. The doors closed, sealing him in the small space with the most famous man in the world. An awkward silence hung in the air for a second. Mark didn't know what to say. Should he ask for an autograph? A photo? Just stare? Elvis broke the silence. "What floor?" he asked politely. Mark stammered his floor number. Elvis nodded and pressed the button. Then he looked at Mark, really looked at him, and asked, "Having a good time in Vegas?" Mark managed to nod and squeak out a, "Yes, sir, Mr. Presley." Elvis chuckled softly. "Just Elvis is fine," he said. They exchanged a few more pleasantries about the city. Elvis asked if Mark had seen his show, and Mark admitted he hadn't been able to get tickets. Elvis seemed genuinely regretful, saying something like, "That's a shame. We tried to put on a good one." The elevator reached Mark's floor far too quickly. As the doors opened, Elvis gave him a nod and a, "Take care, son." Mark stumbled out, completely dazed. He hadn't gotten an autograph or a picture, but he'd had a normal, albeit brief, conversation with Elvis Presley. It wasn't about fame or music. It was just a simple human interaction in an elevator. That unexpected, mundane encounter felt more special to Mark than any concert ever could. He realized Elvis, behind the legend, was also just a person riding an elevator. Number 13, the Hamburger Hut Surprise. Elvis loved his food, especially good old-fashioned American comfort food. He was known to frequent certain local spots in Memphis when he wasn't touring or in Vegas. One such place was a small, unassuming hamburger joint he liked. Brenda worked there part-time while in high school in the late 1960s. It was usually a quiet place, especially late at night. One evening, close to closing time, the bell above the door jingled. Brenda looked up from wiping the counter, expecting maybe a truck driver or a couple looking for a late snack. Instead, her jaw dropped. Elvis Presley walked in, flanked by a couple of his friends. He wasn't in a jumpsuit or anything flashy, just regular clothes, but there was no mistaking him. Brenda felt her knees go weak. He approached the counter with a friendly smile. "Evenin'," he said warmly. "Hope we're not too late to grab a few burgers." Brenda, trying desperately to compose herself, stammered, "No, sir, Mr. Presley, not at all. What can I get for you?" He ordered several burgers and fries for himself and his group, chatting casually with Brenda while she took the order. He asked her name, how long she'd worked there, if she liked the job. He wasn't condescending or acting like a big shot. He seemed genuinely interested. While the cook prepared the food, Elvis leaned against the counter, humming softly to a tune playing low on the radio. Brenda was practically vibrating with excitement, but tried to act professional. When the order was ready, Elvis pulled out a roll of cash. Brenda rang it up, her hands shaking slightly. The total was something like $15. Elvis handed her a $100 bill. "Keep the change, darlin'," he said with a wink. Brenda's eyes widened. "Mr. Presley? I can't." "This is way too much," she protested. Elvis just smiled wider. "You work hard. Treat yourself to something nice," he insisted, gently but firmly. He picked up the bag of food, thanked her again, and walked out, leaving Brenda standing there, clutching the $100 bill, completely starstruck and utterly thrilled. It wasn't just meeting Elvis, it was experiencing his casual generosity and down-to-earth nature in the most unexpected setting. Her humble workplace hamburger hut. Number 12. The fan who got invited inside Graceland. Waiting outside the Graceland gates was a ritual for many fans. They'd stand for hours, sometimes days, hoping Elvis might drive out and wave, or maybe even stop to sign autographs. Usually, that was the extent of the interaction. But sometimes, Elvis did something completely unexpected. Sarah was one of those devoted fans, a regular fixture at the gates in the mid-60s whenever she could make the trip. She wasn't loud or pushy, just quietly hopeful. One hot afternoon, after she'd been standing there for several hours, Elvis drove up to the gates himself, not in a limo, but in a regular car. He stopped and rolled down the window, greeting the small group of fans who had gathered. He signed a few autographs, chatted briefly. Sarah was thrilled just to be that close. As he was about to drive through, Elvis seemed to notice Sarah specifically. Maybe it was her quiet demeanor, or maybe he recognized her from previous vigils. He leaned over and said, "Hey, honey, you look like you could use some lemonade. Why don't y'all come on in for a bit?" Sarah couldn't believe her ears. Did Elvis Presley just invite her inside Graceland? Along with a couple of other fans who were nearby, Sarah was ushered through the hallowed gates by one of Elvis's staff. They weren't taken into the main house, but to a comfortable lounge area near the entrance. True to his word, they were served cold lemonade and cookies. Elvis himself came back a few minutes later, having parked his car. He sat down with them, not as a distant icon, but as a gracious host. He asked them questions, joked around, and seemed genuinely relaxed. He talked about his horses, his love for Memphis, and even asked for their opinions on a song he'd been listening to. The whole experience lasted maybe 20 minutes, but for Sarah, it felt like a lifetime. She was sitting inside Graceland, having lemonade and chatting casually with Elvis Presley. It was a level of access and intimacy she had never dreamed possible. When it was time to leave, Elvis walked them back towards the gate, thanking them for coming. Sarah left Graceland that day walking on air, clutching the memory of Elvis's hospitality far tighter than any autograph. Number 11. The Karate Gift. Elvis was deeply passionate about karate. He achieved a black belt and incorporated karate moves into his stage performances. He respected the discipline and the people involved in martial arts. Mike Stone, a renowned karate champion and instructor, was someone Elvis admired and befriended. But Elvis's connection to karate also extended to fans who shared his passion. Gary, a young karate student from California, was a huge Elvis fan. He knew about Elvis's love for martial arts and dreamed of someday maybe demonstrating some moves for him, or at least talking about karate with the king. During one of Elvis's engagements in Las Vegas in the early 70s, Gary managed to get backstage after a show through a connection. He was incredibly nervous. When he finally got a moment with Elvis, surrounded by the usual post-show buzz, Gary, instead of asking for a typical autograph, mentioned his own involvement in karate. Elvis's eyes immediately lit up. His demeanor shifted from superstar politeness to genuine enthusiasm. He started asking Gary detailed questions: what style he studied, who his instructor was, how long he'd been training. They taught stances, katas, and sparring for several minutes, forgetting the throng of people around them. Elvis was impressed with Gary's dedication. Then Elvis did something remarkable. He told one of his aides to fetch something. A few moments later, the aide returned with a folded white garment. Elvis took it and presented it to Gary. It was one of Elvis's own personal karate GIS uniforms, complete with a black belt. "I want you to have this," Elvis said sincerely. "Keep training hard." Gary was speechless. Holding Elvis Presley's personal G-felt morale. It wasn't just memorabilia. It was a symbol of shared passion, a gift from one martial artist to another. Elvis could have given him a signed photo or a scarf, the usual fan tokens. But he recognized a kindred spirit and offered something deeply personal and meaningful to both of them. Gary treasured that G for the rest of his life, a tangible reminder of the moment. His hero saw him not just as a fan, but as a fellow traveler on the path of martial arts. Number 10. The airport encounter and the signed dollar bill. Airports in the 1950s and 60s were different places. Less security, more access. Stars often traveled commercially, creating opportunities for spontaneous fan encounters. Linda was a teenager, working a summer job at a newsstand in the Memphis airport in the late 1950s. One sweltering afternoon, a commotion near one of the gates caught her attention. People were murmuring, pointing. Then she saw him, Elvis Presley, young, impossibly handsome, dressed sharply, walking through the terminal with a small entourage. Linda's heart leaped into her throat. He was even more magnetic in person than on TV or in magazines. She watched, starstruck, as he moved towards her general direction, heading for his flight. He had to pass right by her newsstand. Acting on pure impulse, Linda grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a crisp $1 bill from her cash register and a pen. As Elvis walked past, she held it out timidly, her hand shaking. "Mr. Presley," she whispered, barely audible. Elvis stopped. He could have easily ignored her, swept along by his group. But he turned, saw the young girl with the dollar bill, and smiled that famous, slightly crooked smile. "Well, hello there," he said. Linda asked if he would possibly sign the dollar bill. One of his companions started to wave her off, saying they were in a hurry. But Elvis put a hand up gently. "It's all right," he said. He took the dollar bill and the pen from Linda's trembling hand. Instead of just scribbling his name, he paused, looked at her, and asked her name. "Linda," she managed to say. He carefully wrote, "To Linda, best wishes, Elvis Presley," on the bill. He handed it back to her, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. "You have a good day now, Linda," he said, flashing another smile before turning and continuing towards his gate. Linda stood frozen behind her counter, clutching the signed dollar bill as if it were the crown jewels. It wasn't just an autograph. It was a personalized moment, a brief connection where he took the time to acknowledge her, ask her name, and offer a kind word, all amidst the rush of his own travel. That dollar bill became her most prized possession, a reminder of a simple, kind gesture from the biggest star on the planet. Number 9. The hospital visit. No one expected. Elvis had a well-known generous side, often giving away cars and jewelry. But some of his acts of kindness were quieter and more personal. In the late 1960s, Jan, a young woman in Memphis, was recovering from a serious car accident in the hospital. She was facing a long and painful recovery, feeling depressed and isolated. She was also a huge Elvis fan. Her family, knowing how much Elvis meant to her, had written a hopeful letter to Graceland explaining Jan's situation and how much a message from her idol might lift her spirits. They never really expected a response. They knew how busy he was. Weeks went by. Jan was having a particularly difficult day, feeling low. Suddenly, there was a gentle knock on her hospital room door. A nurse poked her head in, looking flustered and excited. "Jan," the nurse whispered, "someone is here to see you." Jan figured it was just more family or friends. Then the door opened wider, and Elvis Presley walked into her hospital room. He was dressed casually, wearing sunglasses, but there was no mistaking him. Jan thought she was dreaming or hallucinating from the pain medication. Elvis approached her bed slowly, a look of genuine concern on his face. He introduced himself softly, though it was hardly necessary. He said he'd heard about her accident and wanted to come by and wish her well in person. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed. He didn't stay for hours, but he stayed long enough to make a profound impact. He asked about her recovery, listened patiently as she spoke, offered words of encouragement, and told her to stay strong. He talked about everyday things, trying to distract her from her pain. He even gently held her hand for a moment while telling a light-hearted story. Before he left, he signed a photo for her and promised he'd be thinking of her. The nurses outside the room were buzzing, but Elvis had requested no fanfare. He slipped out as quietly as he had arrived. For Jan, that visit was more potent than any medicine. Knowing that Elvis Presley had taken time out of his incredibly famous life to personally visit her, a regular fan in a hospital bed, gave her a renewed sense of hope and the strength to face her recovery. It was a quiet act of compassion that spoke volumes about the man behind the legend. Number 8. The Midnight Gate Chat and Philosophy. Elvis was famously a night owl. He often felt more comfortable and alive after dark. This sometimes led to late-night interactions with the dedicated fans who kept a vigil outside Graceland. Tom was one such fan, a college student fascinated not just by Elvis's music, but by the man himself. He'd read about Elvis's spiritual interests and his quest for meaning. One very late night, probably closer to 3 a.m., Tom was the only fan left at the Graceland gates. It was quiet and still. Suddenly, the gatehouse light flickered, and Elvis himself ambled out, wearing pajamas and a robe. He seemed contemplative. He walked over to the gate where Tom was standing. Instead of the usual quick autograph or wave, Elvis leaned against the bars and struck up a conversation. He asked Tom what he was doing out so late. Tom, surprised by the direct interaction, explained he was just hoping for a glimpse and was interested in Elvis's life. This seemed to pique Elvis's interest. What followed wasn't the typical fan-idol exchange. Elvis started talking. Really talking. He spoke about his insomnia, his thoughts on fame, his search for spiritual peace, the books he was reading on religion and philosophy. He asked Tom about his own views, listening intently to the young man's responses. They talked for nearly an hour, two people leaning against the Graceland gates in the dead of night, discussing life, God, and the universe. Elvis wasn't performing, he wasn't the king. He was just a man, searching for answers, sharing his thoughts with a stranger who happened to be there. He spoke about the pressures of his life, the difficulty of finding genuine connection. Tom was mesmerized, not just by being with Elvis, but by the depth and vulnerability he was witnessing. Eventually, Elvis seemed to realize the time, yawned, and said he should probably try to get some sleep. He thanked Tom for the chat, shook his hand through the bars, and walked back towards the house. Tom was left alone in the pre-dawn quiet, profoundly moved. He hadn't just met Elvis Presley. He connected with Elvis Aaron Presley, the man in a moment of unexpected philosophical intimacy under the Memphis stars. Number 7. He paid for a stranger's dental work. Elvis's generosity often manifested in grand gestures like giving away cars. But sometimes it was directed towards addressing very specific practical needs, he observed. Marianne was a hotel maid working at one of the hotels where Elvis frequently stayed during his tours, or recording sessions possibly in Nashville or Las Vegas. She was a diligent worker, but life wasn't easy, and money was tight. She had significant dental problems that caused her pain and embarrassment, but she simply couldn't afford the expensive treatment needed. Elvis, being observant, noticed Mary Ann over the course of several days. He saw her quiet professionalism, but also perhaps sensed her discomfort or saw her trying to hide her smile. He had a habit of chatting briefly with hotel staff, asking their names, making them feel seen. One day, Elvis discreetly asked one of his entourage members to find out more about the maid, who seemed troubled. Learning about her dental issues and her inability to pay for the necessary work, Elvis was moved. He didn't make a big public show of it. Instead, he arranged for one of his associates to contact a top local dentist. Elvis covered the entire cost of Mary Ann's extensive dental treatment, ensuring she received the best care possible. It was all handled anonymously at first, through his representatives. Mary Ann was contacted and told that a benefactor wished to pay for her dental work. She was overwhelmed and confused, wondering who would do such a thing. It was only later, perhaps through a discreet word from Elvis's team or the dentist himself, that she learned her benefactor was Elvis Presley. He never sought thanks or recognition for it. He simply saw someone quietly struggling, someone who worked hard but faced a difficult obstacle, and he used his resources to alleviate her pain and restore her confidence. For Marianne, it was a life-changing gift, far more Apple than a signed photo. It was an act of deep practical compassion from a superstar who paid attention to the lives of ordinary people around him. Number 6. One of the iconic moments of any Elvis concert in the 70s was when he would drape scarves around his neck, often wiping his brow with them, and then toss them into the audience. These scarves became coveted treasures for fans. Getting one was a matter of luck, position, and sometimes a bit of a scramble. Debbie attended numerous Elvis concerts, always hoping to catch one of those famous scarves. She'd stand as close to the stage as possible, reaching out with everyone else, but luck was never on her side. During one particular concert in Vegas, Debbie was again near the front, caught up in the energy of the show. Elvis was in fine form, singing powerfully, moving across the stage, connecting with the audience. He went through his scarf ritual several times, tossing them into the eager hands, reaching towards him. Debbie, as usual, missed out. She felt a familiar pang of disappointment, but was still thrilled just to be there. Towards the end of the concert, during a quieter moment, Elvis was standing near her side of the stage, catching his breath. He looked out over the audience, his gaze sweeping across the front rows. His eyes met Debbie's. Maybe he saw the longing in her expression, or maybe it was just a random connection. He wasn't holding any spare scarves at that moment. What he did next stunned Debbie. He reached up slowly, untied the beautiful, sweat-dampened scarf he was actually wearing around his own neck, the one that was part of his current costume for that very show. He leaned down slightly and deliberately tossed that specific scarf directly towards Debbie. It sailed through the air and landed right in her outstretched hands. The crowd around her gasped. Getting a scarf was special. Getting the one he was wearing felt incredibly personal. Elvis gave her a small nod and a quick smile before turning back to the microphone. Debbie clutched the scarf, overwhelmed with emotion. It smelled faintly of his cologne and effort. It wasn't just a mass-produced souvenir tossed randomly. It felt like a direct, personal gift, a momentary recognition in a vast arena. That scarf became more than just memorabilia. It was a symbol of a unique connection, a tangible piece of the king given directly to her. Number 5. The young fan who got drumsticks from Ronnie Tutt. While meeting Elvis himself was the ultimate dream. Sometimes the magic rubbed off on his band members too, leading to special encounters. Kevin was a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, completely obsessed with Elvis. But more than just Elvis, Kevin loved the sound of the band, especially the powerful drumming of Ronnie Tutt, the TCB band's legendary drummer. Kevin attended an Elvis concert with his parents, sitting maybe midway back in the arena. He spent half the concert watching Elvis, and the other half mesmerized by Ronnie Tutt's incredible skill and energy behind the drum kit. Kevin dreamed of being a drummer himself one day. After the concert ended and the lights came up, the arena slowly started to empty. Kevin, however, lingered near the stage area with his dad, hoping maybe to see the band members pack up, or just soak in the atmosphere a little longer. Ronnie Tutt was still on stage, overseeing the breakdown of his massive drum set. Kevin watched him with wide-eyed admiration. Seeing the young boy's intense focus, Ronnie Tutt smiled. He finished talking to a stagehand, then picked up a pair of his used drumsticks, the very ones he might have used during the show Kevin just watched. He walked over to the edge of the stage, directly above where Kevin and his dad were standing. Ronnie leaned down. "Hey, kid," he called out, getting Kevin's attention. "You like the drums?" Kevin nodded enthusiastically, speechless. Ronnie grinned. "Here," he said, and tossed the drumsticks down gently. Kevin's dad caught them and handed them to his son. They were worn, marked from hitting cymbals and rims, real professional sticks used by Elvis Presley's drummer. "Practice hard," Ronnie called down, giving Kevin a thumbs up before turning back to his work. Kevin clutched the drumsticks as if they were made of solid gold. Meeting Elvis would have been amazing, but getting drumsticks directly from Ronnie Tutt, his drumming hero, felt incredibly special and validating for his own musical aspirations. It was a moment of kindness from a member of Elvis's inner circle, showing that the generosity and connection extended beyond just the king himself. Number 4. Sharing a Coke at a gas station. Elvis, despite his fame, sometimes craved normalcy. He enjoyed driving around Memphis late at night, sometimes stopping at unexpected places. One hot summer night in the early 60s, two teenage friends, Bill and Jerry, were hanging out at a sleepy, all-night gas station on the outskirts of Memphis. They were bored, just talking and sipping Cokes. Suddenly, a shiny Cadillac pulled into the station lot. This wasn't unusual, but the driver who got out definitely was. It was Elvis Presley. Bill and Jerry froze Cokes halfway to their lips. Elvis, looking relaxed in casual clothes, walked towards the station's vending machine. He seemed to be fumbling for change. He glanced over at the two teenagers staring at him. Instead of ignoring them or getting annoyed, he gave a friendly nod. "Hey, fellas," he said casually. "This darn machine ate my quarter." Bill, regaining his senses slightly, quickly offered, "Here, Mr. Presley, take one of ours." He held out his unopened bottle of Coke. Elvis smiled. "Nah, that's yours. Tell you what, you got another dime." Bill fumbled in his pocket and produced a dime. Elvis took it, added it to his own change, and successfully bought a Coke from the machine. He popped the top. Then, instead of just walking back to his car, he leaned against the wall near Bill and Jerry. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" he asked. The three of them stood there for about 10 minutes, leaning against the gas station wall in the middle of the night, drinking Coca-Colas. Elvis asked them about school cars, what kids were listening to. He talked about music he liked, complained playfully about the Memphis heat. He wasn't Elvis the superstar. He was just a guy sharing a Coke brick with two local kids. He treated them like equals, genuinely interested in their conversation. When he finished his Coke, He tossed the bottle in the bin, thanked them for the dime and the company, gave a friendly wave, got back in his Cadillac, and drove off into the night. Bill and Jerry just stood there, stunned. They hadn't asked for an autograph. The moment felt too real, too normal for that. They had just hung out with Elvis Presley at a gas station, sharing Cokes and conversation like old friends. Number 3. The impromptu performance at a piano store. Elvis's love for music extended beyond the stage. He loved gospel, blues, country, and often enjoyed playing the piano. He was known to occasionally pop into music stores, especially in Memphis. One afternoon in the 1960s, a Memphis piano store was having a relatively quiet day. A few customers browsed, and a salesman idly polished a grand piano. The door opened, and in walked Elvis Presley, accompanied by a friend. He wasn't looking for fanfare. He seemed genuinely interested in the pianos. The few people in the store froze, recognizing him immediately. Elvis nodded politely to the stunned salesman and wandered over to a beautiful spinet piano tucked in a corner. He sat down on the bench, lifted the keyboard cover, and tentatively played a few chords. Then, seemingly lost in the moment, he began to play and sing softly. It wasn't one of his rock and roll hits. He started playing a gospel hymn, his rich voice filling the small store with incredible warmth and sincerity. He played and sang for several minutes, completely absorbed in the music. The customers and staff stood silently, captivated by this unexpected, intimate performance. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was heartfelt and soulful. He played another gospel tune, then perhaps a bluesy riff, his fingers moving expertly over the keys. It felt less like a celebrity appearance, and more like witnessing a musician reconnecting with his roots in the most organic way possible. When he finished, he paused for a moment, then closed the keyboard cover gently. He stood up, smiled at the small mesmerized audience who had gathered nearby, gave a small wave, and quietly left the store with his friend. No autographs were signed, no photos taken. The people in the store were left breathless, having experienced a private impromptu concert by Elvis Presley, driven purely by his love for music and the simple joy of playing a piano. It was a magical, fleeting moment that transcended fame. Number 2. The fan magazine editor, who got a personal tour. Being the editor of an Elvis fan magazine in the 1950s meant dedicating your life to covering his every move. But actually meeting him, especially getting quality time, was still a challenge. One such editor, let's call her Jean, had been running a popular fan publication for years, meticulously documenting his career. She had occasionally managed brief interviews or photo ops at press events. During a trip Elvis made back to Memphis in the late 50s, Jean was hoping for another brief interview. She contacted Elvis's management, expecting the usual runaround or a tightly controlled few minutes. To her immense surprise, she received a message back inviting her to Graceland. Not just for an interview, but for a personal tour, guided by Elvis himself. Jean arrived at Graceland, nervous and excited. Elvis greeted her warmly at the door, not as a journalist, but almost like an old friend he was welcoming into his home. For the next couple of hours, Elvis personally showed Jean around the newly acquired mansion, which was still undergoing renovations and decorating. He pointed out rooms, shared his plans for the decor, including the famous jungle room, still in its conceptual stage, talked about his parents, and showed genuine pride in his home. He was relaxed, funny, and incredibly open. He answered all her questions, not just about his career, but about his personal life, his hopes, his feelings about fame. He treated her with respect, valuing her dedication as a fan and a chronicler of his life. He even introduced her to his parents, Vernon and Gladys, who were there at the time. It was far beyond any professional courtesy Jean had ever expected. She wasn't just getting scoops for her magazine, she was getting an unprecedented, intimate look into Elvis Presley's world, guided by the man himself. He made her feel completely welcome and valued. That personal tour and candid conversation provided material for her magazine for months. But more importantly, it gave Jean an unforgettable memory of Elvis's hospitality and willingness to connect on a human level, even with someone from the press. Number 1. The Boy Who Traded a Frog for an Autograph. This story perfectly captures the charm and unexpected sweetness Elvis could display, especially early in his career. It happened in the mid-1950s, when Elvis was rapidly becoming a sensation but hadn't yet been completely walled off by fame. A young boy named Billy lived near the Presley family in Memphis. Like many kids, Billy loved catching critters. One day, he managed to catch a particularly large, impressive frog. And proud of his catch, he carried it around in a little jar. He knew the Presley family lived nearby and had seen Elvis around. On this particular afternoon, Billy saw Elvis sitting on his front porch, relaxing. Mustering all his courage, young Billy walked up the path towards the rising star, clutching his jarred frog. Elvis looked up and saw the little boy approaching tentatively. "Whatcha got there, son?" Elvis asked kindly. Billy proudly held up the jar. "It's a frog," he announced. "Biggest one I ever caught." Elvis peered at the frog with genuine interest. "Well now, he sure is a big fella," Elvis agreed, playing along. Then Billy, in a moment of childhood bartering genius, made an offer. "Mr. Presley," he said earnestly, "would you trade your autograph for my frog?" Elvis looked surprised, then burst into laughter, a warm, genuine laugh. He was clearly charmed by the boy's innocent offer. Most people wanted his autograph for free, or offered money, or screamed. Trading it for a frog was definitely a first. "You know what, Billy?" Elvis said, still smiling. "That sounds like a fair trade to me." He took a piece of paper and a pen, carefully signed his name, and handed it to the boy. True to his word, he then accepted the jar with the frog inside, handling it gently. He admired the frog again, thanked Billy for the unique trade, and chatted with him for another minute or two before the boy ran off ecstatic with his signed paper. Elvis reportedly kept the frog for a little while, showing it off to his family and friends, retelling the story of the boy who traded his prize catch for an autograph. It was a simple, humorous, and incredibly endearing encounter that tokayed Elvis's ability to connect with people of all ages, his down-to-earth nature, and his capacity for finding joy in the unexpected moments of life, even trading treasures with a neighborhood kid.